How's everybody doing? How's everybody doing? Yeah. What do you guys think about the last topic? How many of you think we can solve aging? 1, 2. Okay, the rest of the folks, don't worry about it. We'll see them only for another 20 years. All right, next up, we're going to talk to Zach Fallon, ex-SEC. And I'll let Christian introduce himself, and we'll get this panel started. If you guys want, you guys can come a little forward, and we'll give some ample time to do Q&A with Zach. If you are doing an ICO, have a question about securities, how is SEC looking? I mean, he can't actually speak for the SEC, but at least he'll give you his opinion. And if you want to do that, just come up front, and we'll give you the mic for a couple of minutes. And this is kind of like an extension of what Berkeley Blockchain did in the month of November?
November, yep.
Yeah, it was in November that they did this panel, and I thought it was very, very informative. And we wanted to bring Zach along for another slot and help you guys out. And with that, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Kurt. All right.
You didn't want to put the helmet on?
I was thinking about it. Shall we? Or should we give it to this guy?
He's already on the ejector seat.
All right. So
by the way, is it comfortable, Zach?
Yeah.
It looks fine?
Yeah.
They said there's a seatbelt somewhere, and I can't find it. And there is one. It's actually a live ejector seat, so just don't press a button.
Okay.
Just be
no,
careful.
I think you do this, right? I remember from Top Gun, you pull this or something.
I never saw Top Gun, sorry.
Okay.
Hey, everyone. Christian Ferri here, President and CEO of BlockStar. We're an advisory and investment firm out of San Francisco. Reason why I'm on this panel, though, is because last year I co-founded something called the Blockchain Compliance Alliance. It's a no-profit, open-source organization to really kind of foster the growth of the blockchain community, to harmonize relationship with regulators, and to legitimize the space. One of the projects that we're working on is Project Uno, just like Project One. It's about creating a self-regulating standard for ICOs in conjunction with regulators. So fire away any questions that you might have around that.
Okay, let's get started. So Zach, I know you left SEC. Are you able to tell us why you left SEC?
I didn't get fired. Yeah, so actually today is my first day in the private sector. So yesterday was my last day at the SEC, and it's fitting for me to be here. In fact, I should say this is such an amazing venue, and
Thank you.
I'm so glad to be here. My just quickly, just a little anecdote. My grandfather served on the USS Hornet, the prior USS Hornet that was sunk in the Battle of Santa Cruz, and actually had to jump off the deck into the water and swim and survive. And he later came and was stationed in Alameda and took command of the USS Salisbury Sound, which is another famous wartime ship. He took command of it here in this port in Alameda. So for me, it's fitting to end my service with the government, and to be here today is just, this is a sort of, it's meaningful for me on many levels, and to speak with everyone here. The reason I left the commission, it's a great time to come out into the market and help companies. Frankly, in the last few years, the last year in particular, it's been a little frustrating to sit and watch companies go down the path of noncompliance. I am a big advocate for small business. I've always been. I come from a family of small business owners, and I'm starting my own small business in entering the private sector. Compliance with the securities laws doesn't need to be a scary thing. Regulators are not scary people. They're people just like you or me. And engaging with them and engaging with the regulatory regime doesn't need to be an adversarial engagement. It should be, the regulatory regime is there to help you, both as a company and as an investor, to eliminate an uncertainty and to provide certainty as to certain paths which you can pursue to raise money and which certain information you can use to make informed investment decisions. That is the core of the securities regime. And to the extent I can help companies navigate that or to bridge a divide between the Bay Area and Washington, D.C., then I want to do that. That's really the reason I left.
Can I ask a hypothetical question? Can SEC do this? And I know I might probably be in hot water for this. Can SEC say, hey, we will charge $200,000 every ICO come and we'll help you guide through the process?
Wait, say the first part again, sorry.
SEC says, we will guide you through the process, we will charge you $200,000 or 2% or 3% or 6% of the success fee.
No, the SEC can't.
Why not?
Well, first off, the SEC does in substance that and doesn't charge you for it.
But I want them to charge us. I want them to charge us and say, this is how. So then it'll become clear what is doable and what's not doable and not have these humongous gray area, because now we have to go to an intermediary party, which are the lawyers. Nothing against lawyers, nothing against you, and against Zach. But if we are in the blockchain space, we are disintermediating these third parties. It will be much more efficient. And I have the same philosophy with IRS as well. Stop making all of these rules and loopholes. Just do our taxes and we'll pay you a cut. Every dollar that you help us save, we'll give you 50 cents. But you do our taxes.
Yeah. I used to that.
So where the office I was in as of yesterday was the Office of Small Business Policy. And in my office, we receive over 1,700 calls in last year from people like yourself, from lawyers, from investors, from market participants of all sorts, asking for help with compliance. And that's what we do. We answer the questions. We try to call back within 24 hours. We try. In my former life, that's what we would aim to do. We're there. They are there to help you. They're not there to judge you. They want to usher you into the regulatory regime because it's there for your benefit. It's a long, tried and true regime that's very flexible and principles-based, and it can be navigated. So when people say there's a gray area, I don't necessarily agree. The rules are clear. And the idea of what a security is much clearer than people think when you actually drill down into the analysis. Now, yes, I spent a lot of time thinking about the issues, so I'm not going to say that when I first started as a securities attorney, I understood any of it. In fact, one of the reasons I wanted to go work for the Securities and Exchange Commission is because when I was in private practice, I didn't feel like I was doing a service to clients when I didn't understand what the rules were I was applying. Right? That's the definition of malpractice in many ways. So it is a skill set that needs to be learned, certainly, but there is a thing. There are papers and there are words on those papers that tell you how to navigate and what is required and why. And so it's a lot of information. I don't expect people running businesses to understand all of that information, but that's why you have advisors or have attorneys. You don't necessarily need them. There's no requirement under the rules that you hire an attorney, but it's an efficiency issue, isn't it? You can do all these things yourself, but it's not efficient. It's not efficient to do your own taxes all the time or to handle your own accounting. It's also not efficient to run your own token sale or securities offering when, in fact, you don't really know what you're doing.
But it's in some instances, this is slightly different from all the other, or if you look at the Internet 1.0, and this has come up a couple of times where as a developer, you can wake up and build a website or build a feature or a software without actually having to go through an archaic, well, I'm calling it archaic because I'm on the other side, so I don't have visibility into that. But in the crypto space, in the ICO, in the token sales, as a developer, as soon as I wake up in the morning and I'm about to do a token sale, I have to now engage a lawyer, I have to engage a tax audit firm, I have to engage a local jurisdiction lawyer, and which was never the case before. I mean, you could do a Delaware C Corp using LegalZoom and you're almost okay, till you actually start making a lot of money. But here, from the get-go, you have to engage a lawyer. So I almost feel like there's a huge entry to barrier in the token sale when that wasn't the intent of the ICO space.
I think Part of the problem is this blending of investment opportunities with potential use cases of products down the line. There's nothing says you have to raise capital in advance of the creation of a thing by selling that thing in advance. When you do that, and you create the expectation in the minds of the people who you're taking money from that they're going to have a thing that is more valuable than maybe the money in which they're giving you, and you're the one who's going to get that, help them realize that potential value appreciation, that is by definition a security. And that is not a new definition. That is a definition that has been around for over 80 years. And so you can call it whatever you want, but if that isn't the substance of what it is, that is why you're running into the regulatory regime. There's nothing to say that, that you need to raise money from people in this way. People can invest in you in the traditional way. But if you want to blend these things together, right, that is the byproduct, is that you've created an investment, an investment contract for all intents and purposes with investors, in many ways promising them a return on their investment. And that's just fundamental. So it's hard for me not to see that. I get the frustration, I get the point, but if you truly just if you want to eliminate the profit motive from all of this, then you're not going to, you may very well eliminate the securities law investment analysis. But I don't think it doesn't sound to me like people are interested in eliminating the profit motive. So it's a bit of wanting your cake and eating it too. And so I think the idea here is just that people need to, if you want to go this route, you need to embrace what you're doing, the substance of what you're doing, and move on like adults.
It's a great segue, actually. A question that we got a lot from the Alliance standpoint is that baseball cards, right? They have no utility. They're traded on exchanges, and they have monetary value. And the SEC is okay now considering baseball cards a security, right? But in fact, they sound very much like a security from an outside standpoint. So what do you think about that?
So, I mean, baseball cards is an interesting question, right? So let's look at it. Look at a baseball card. How is that a security, or how is that not a security? People buy baseball cards for investment. People buy them to collect them. People buy them to give to their kid because their kid loves the player and wants to feel like they've got some tangible part of that player. The collectible issue, the kid issue, I don't think anyone's going to say that's a security. But okay, what about that person who buys the baseball card for an investment? Okay, so if the person buying that baseball card, does that make it a security? Is that person buying an equity interest in the card maker by buying the card? No. Debt? No. Participation in some profit arrangement? No. Is it an investment contract? Okay, well, let's do the analysis. The Howey Test, which everyone loves to talk about, and for good reason, because it's very apropos in this space, says a transaction in which a person invests money in a common enterprise is led to expect profits solely from the efforts of others. So how does that work with the baseball card? Is the purchaser of the baseball card led to expect profits? Does the card maker lead that person to expect profits? No, the card maker is just selling a baseball card. The card maker is not leading the purchaser to think that they're going to make money off of this.
So it's the expectation.
The card maker is not leading the person to believe in a profit.
It's the expectation that,
the person may have their own expectation. Right. I could buy a lemon car and think it's going to be really great value, but the car maker isn't selling it to me as a thing of appreciating in value. The other thing is, why does a baseball card appreciate in value? Solely on the efforts of others. Well, the others meaning the card maker. Well, a baseball card doesn't increase in value because of the card maker. It increases value because somebody is a great baseball player. Someone out in the world, Cal Ripken Jr.'s rookie card is of value because Cal Ripken Jr. is an amazing baseball player with a long career. His brother, Billy Ripken, Not so much. The baseball card's not worth so much. That has nothing to do with the card maker who made the thing. Now, you could imagine a scenario where a card maker has no baseball cards, right? And he says, listen, people, give me your money. I'm going to make some baseball cards. And these baseball cards are going to be worth so much money, you can't even believe it. And not only that, I'm going to create a venue on which you can trade those baseball cards. And you can make money on the trading of those. Or just hold on to them, and they'll appreciate in value. And when you're ready, you can use the ecosystem I create to trade them. If a card maker did that, that's a different analysis than the scenario in which card makers just sell them because kids want a piece of their favorite player. Somebody wants to hold on to it because they remember that time their dad took them to see the game. And to the extent that people are holding on to them for investments, it's not because of anything the card maker did. It's because of something that's happening outside the ecosystem.
For the people who are here and people who are planning to do an ICO, what are the top 2 or top 3 advice that you can give them and say, if you're doing this, do X, Y, and Z? Because I want them to take some of these action items back home.
Yeah.
And when they're working on their project or on their ICO, they're able to at least say, okay, this is a good piece of advice. I'll use it. What can you tell them, maybe 3 or 4 tips that they can actually take today and apply?
Yeah, so I would say do your analysis before you do anything. Don't do the analysis after the fact, because securities laws violations are necessarily post hoc determinations, right? You've done something that violated the securities laws. That thing has already happened, the violation has already happened, so now you're in the situation of, oh crap, how do I fix this? To avoid that, do the analysis up front. And so the question should be, because we're often asked, okay, so I have this decentralized organization and it has a token, who is the issuer? Well, the answer to that question, again, if you first ask the question, is this a security, before you do anything, and if what you determine to be, you determine that what you're producing or offering is in fact a security, then you can ask the question, upon whose efforts are the people who are going to buy these things that I am going to sell at some point, upon whose efforts are they relying in order to make a profit? Those are the people around whom, those are the people who are issuing the security. Those are the issuers. It may be you. It may be your group of your friends, your buddies who are programming it. Those are the people around whom you want to wrap an entity to protect yourselves, frankly, from the potential violation down the line, hopefully, but you don't violate, right, because you create the entity that offers the security. And so then you're already in the ecosystem and you're functioning. And then, the other thing is, I think the mindset just needs to shift as to worrying about navigating the regulatory regime, and rather focus on worrying about eliminating the uncertainty of avoiding the regulatory regime. Because there is certainly a cost to going out and raising money outside of the regulatory regime. There's a tax to that, right? The constantly looking over your shoulder and waiting to give the people who gave you money a 1-year put back to you to the extent your company isn't successful. So I would say do your analysis up front, and then once you've made once you have a solid analysis as to that this is a security, which in the vast majority of cases they are, then you can figure out what your options are and move forward and speak to someone who can help you. Call the SEC, ask them what your options are.
So when they call the SEC, what are the phone codes they need to press to get to the right person?
Yeah, so well, first off, go to the SEC's website.
Okay.
Because there's a ton of information on there. It is really useful.
And what can they do so that when they're presenting their question to make the life of the SEC staffers and the commissioners on the other side easier, so that they can look at a question and say, yep, I know what they're asking, rather than stay 30 minutes on the call and
yeah, don't call the SEC and say, this is not a security. Okay, because then if it is truly not a security, then the SEC's got nothing to do with it. Call the SEC when you know what you're dealing with is a security and say, okay, I have a security here. what are my options? And then you'll find a receptive answer.
Got it. Do you believe that will get us a true utility token out the door?
I'm hopeful that there will be tokens of use in the future.
Can you
But
name?
the idea, the problem I see is that when you couple the investment opportunity with that thing, when you have a token that exists on an ecosystem, and the value of that token is tied to the value of that ecosystem,
Right.
you can do a lot to prevent the securities laws analysis on the front end. You cannot promote it as an investment opportunity. You can restrict tradability to a certain extent. But if at the end of the day, this thing you've created is a dApp, and you have a dApp-specific token, the value of which are directly correlated and coupled together, you cannot decouple them from each other, then you're going to have, you may very well always have a question as to whether or not you have destructured your thing to always be a security. So the idea that you can have a utility, a token could have a utility, a use case, be a product of some sort or saleable in its own right, there's nothing wrong with that in the abstract. The problem is when you pre-sell and you create this expectation and you're promising pie in the sky and not delivering, or potentially delivering way down the line, you're creating speculation. You're creating an environment, a speculative environment that let's assume there is a utility, but you have this correlation between value of token and value of network. You can have a utility, but that utility it works in reverse direction to the value, because to the extent that people speculate on the value, it's going to go up, and the utility of that thing will go down, because it's more useful to hold on to it as an investment than to use the thing you're trying to get people to use in the first instance.
Right.
So there's a fundamental problem with that model from a securities law standpoint. And so there may be a perpetual problem with pursuing that. Now, that's only a problem if you want to avoid the regulatory regime. Okay, but if you embrace it, then you just be the adult and say, okay, this is what it is, this is what I'm offering, and this is how I'm gonna live in this world.
I know that we're actually on time. I don't know if there's very good questions. I think a lot of people that are running to ask these questions is, we think about the SEC, CFTC, and IRS, all these regulatory bodies, to kind of come down from a top down and kind of create this strict regulatory framework. But there's also an alternative to that, like building something from the bottom up with self-regulating standards, right? Something that we're doing with the Alliance, something that community should embrace, and sort of one standard that it's widely accepted by the industry. Everybody goes through it. It's very clear, very transparent, immutable, and it's actually done conjointly with the regulators. So regulators also help define these self-regulating standards. What do you think? What do you think of that? Do you think that the regulators, in this specific case, the SEC, are receptive to kind of work with organizations like that and build organization self-regulating standards, or they're more from the top-down approach? They want to kind of crash this thing and can kind of put in some strict regulations around it.
No, I mean, I think the SEC wants people to embrace the regime in any number of ways. In some ways, you don't need a self-regulating standard, if that's what you're saying, because as we were talking about before, the rules are there. The rules are there. You can find them, and you can follow them out in their own right. The entities you're talking about, or the alliances you're talking about, are helpful to distill that information and perhaps be able to convey it and make it more user-friendly, to aggregate it. Those things are on the SEC's website already as well, but yes, the outreach issue is very important, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about the regulatory regime. And they are, yes, certainly receptive, 100%.
Does anybody have any questions for Zach? If you do, stand up right now, and we'll charge you $200 a minute.
Speak now, hold it forever.
He's in private sector now, guys, so that's the going rate. By the
Ask away.
Did I tell you that he's planning to get into Hollywood, right, Zach? You're going to work in the movie industry?
Am I?
Yeah? No?
Oh, no. Well, okay. No. I don't know. Somebody's hired. There's a movie production company here.
All right, go for it, guys. He's here. Quick question, just before you started. To the point, guys. Ask the quick question. No history, no background, just the question.
Yeah, and no promise on good answers either. So.
Thank you. The utility tokens.
I can't hear you.
Louder.
Ideally, we want the utility token to be used by the end users who are using the system, but there is an expectation of profit by the investors. So how do you get the utility token to the actual users rather than the investors?
So I'm very sorry. I didn't catch the question. Did either of you catch it?
In an ideal world, you want the utility tokens to be used by the users of the system.
Yeah, in an ideal world, you want the utility token to be used by the users of the system. Yeah.
Most of them are not going to be accredited investors. Most of them are not going to be accredited investors.
Most of them are not going to be accredited investors, yeah.
So when you're raising money, and you're raising money from accredited investors using Reg D, how do you get the tokens to the actual users who we want them to use the system?
Do a Reg A offering.
But the Reg A offering sends the tokens to the investors. It doesn't go to the hands of the end users.
Why? What? The Reg A offering, the tokens go to the hands of who?
If you're selling utility tokens that the investors are buying through Reg A offering, these are accredited investors. How do you get the end users who are going to be utilizing the system?
So a Reg A offering, you don't need to be accredited to purchase, right? So anyone can purchase in a Reg A offering.
Okay.
So and by the way, you're saying utility token, but let's just call it the security.
Okay.
You're selling a security. You can call it a token if you want.
Okay.
You're selling a security, and you want to get that security in the hands of potential users of this ecosystem. Is that correct?
Yes.
So that would be there's options. Yep. You could register the offering, for one. You could go full bore registration. You could do a Reg A offering and sell it to them in that regard, and they're freely tradable on the back of the Reg A offering. Presumably, those investors would also be users, and there's a benefit to that, right? Because they'd be your ambassadors as well.
Yes.
And you deputize them in many ways to not only to be your to use your system, but to advocate for your system and to potentially bring others into it. Crowdfunding, you could do the same thing with crowdfunding.
Thanks.
Right, why don't you come over here?
Okay, Zach, my name is Ann. I'm a cryptocurrency venture capitalist, and you guys scare me. As you see, I might lose all my clients' money because of two things. I heard that even if it's a utility token, but as soon as you go ICO or even raise fund from venture capitalists, it's considered as a security token. And that concerns me because you have audited 200 companies that has gone ICO. They call themselves utility tokens because they have gone ICO. You now consider them security tokens. And you're about to go after another 80% companies that has went ICO. And you have ordered cease and desist. A lot of companies went down because you have audited them and you have ceased and ordered cease and desist. And all the investors lost their money. So it's unfair, it's scary because it seems like you can go backtrack, even though they have launched their cryptocurrency, their company, before the SEC regulation came in place. It only came in place recently, but you could go back and audit people that has already launched. So utility token versus security token, that's my first question. And then second question, how can you backtrack, and audit people? So those are my concerns. Thank you.
Well, I say, second question first. As I said, violations of securities laws are necessarily post hoc determinations, right? Because you did a thing, and somebody needs to look at it and say, what was that thing you did? Oh, you violated securities laws. So they are necessarily, by definition, post hoc determinations, because before you violate the law, there is no violation. It happens when you do a thing. Somebody looks back and says, that was a violation. So that's not an SEC issue. That's an issue of anything. You broke the speed limit. You didn't break it when you were going 45. You broke it when you were going, when you crossed over 65 and started going 70. You can't avoid that. And then the utility token issue. Again, I don't know what a utility token is. I don't necessarily think, I'm not saying they can't exist and that there won't be things that have utility that can be traded on within an ecosystem within certain bounds. But a security, if it's a security, it's a security, and that's why the SEC would look at it and they'd make a determination. They wouldn't, the burden is on. Remember where the burden lies when you conduct an offering. If you either register an offering or you do an offering that's exempt pursuant to the regulatory regime, the burden of proof of compliance with an exemption is with the person who issued the securities. So if the SEC comes knocking and says, did you register your offering? And you say no, and you say, well, then what did you do? Well, I did it. It was an exempt offering. Okay, well, what was your exemption? The burden is on you to show, or the issuer, to show compliance with an exemption. They're non-exclusive, so you can, if you don't comply with one, there are others which you could have potentially complied with. But the burden is on you to show that compliance, and so that's really what the SEC would be asking you to do.
You have audited companies that even before those regulations were implemented.
Which regulations are you talking about? Because Reg A has been out since 2015. I know because I wrote it. Literally, I wrote it. Reg crowdfunding came out in 2016. Reg D has been out since 1982. Reg S, 98 at least. These aren't new things. The Jobs Act, there are some, 506C, Reg A, Reg crowdfunding. Those are relatively new, but they're not. 3 years is a long time ago from a regulatory standpoint.
Zach, can we take one more question?
Oh yeah,
and then
I
maybe
can take, well, we can talk all day.
You're going to stay back here, I'm assuming, or you have some time to talk to people afterwards?
Yeah, please come and ask me. Happy
all right,
to talk.
let's take one more question and then let's get the next panel guys on. All right? Sorry.
Hey, thanks a lot. I was just wondering if we manage the expectations to the potential buyer in the ICO white paper and the communication that you should not expect any increase in value of the token, that this is purely an utility, one. And two, do not sell something that does not exist, as in they buy something that exists today, they can get utility out of it. And three, if we put some terms around when this would be liquid, as in when this is available on exchanges, not in the near term, would those protect the ICO issuer in terms of making it more of a utility token than a security, or are you still exposed?
You can still be exposed. You can pre-sell. You can go to Kickstarter and build pre-fund the production of a blender. No, there shouldn't be a securities law problem there. Anything could potentially be, but in all likelihood, there's no issue there. The problem becomes, because once you have that blender, the company could go away, but you still have a blender. You can still use this thing to make shakes. If that blender could only function on the company's, you could only function at the company's headquarters, plugged into their electrical grid, and if that company went away, there would be no blender, then your investment in that blender, pre-purchase of the blender, looks a lot like an investment in the continuing going concern of that company. So you can navigate away from a lot of the issues in your offering materials, and to the extent you're concerned about securities laws and you truly don't want to have a security, then yes, there are things on the front end that you want to avoid, like talking about how the token's going to be this great investment, just the most obvious thing that people shouldn't be doing. But there may be some fundamental flaws in just the ecosystem itself. And part of that is when you, as I see it, is sort of this idea of the coupling of the token with the network. If you had a token potentially, and I'm not saying this is anything the SEC would bless, but just something I think about, if you had a token that was different, not a network-specific token, but something that is more currency-like, then that looks, to the extent you navigate out on the front end and don't trip up in the front end, potentially in the back end, there may be some flexibility there because you have not created an ecosystem in which the value of that thing you're selling is dependent on the value of the network or somehow directly correlated. If you had, if it was functioning in dollars, the value of your network is not going to affect the value of a dollar, right? Google could disappear tomorrow, and the dollar, United States dollar, isn't going to necessarily waver too terribly much, if at all. But the same would not be true with a successful network and a network-specific token, right? Because as soon as that thing disappears, so too will the other.
Thank you, Zach. Audience member wants to know, which ICO are you investing now that you're not with the SEC?
I'm not investing in it.
Come on, top 2.
Top 2. No. I'm in such early stages. Maybe call me back in 6 months. Maybe I'll have
Any one of the booths out there, did they interest you? Did they give you their brochure and you circled it out like violation?
No. The beautiful thing is there's so many brilliant potential ideas. This is not an idea crisis issue, right? This is not a crisis of ideas,
right?
Or talent, but it's more than anything. It's just putting those ideas in perspective of a country which exists and is founded on based on rule of law.
Thank you, Zach. And guys, Zach will be on the floor, so you guys can talk to him afterwards. Thank you, Zach.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks. Thanks, Kurt.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.